Under the strain of this continually impending doom and by the sleeplessness to which I now condemned myself, even beyond what I had thought possible to man, I became in my own person a creature eaten up and emptied by fever, languidly weak both in body and mind, and solely occupied by one thought, the horror of my other self. Sometimes our most carnal desires can remain hidden even from ourselves for our own good. We deny ourselves animalistic pleasures so that at the end of every day we can look ourselves in the mirror and say, yes, I am a good person. But what would happen if when you looked into that mirror, it wasn't your reflection that you saw, but that of a creature completely unrecognizable to you, one that you didn't have to take responsibility for? That is the premise of The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and that's the book that we're going to be talking about today. Listen, I thought I knew this book. Before I read it, I thought I understood exactly what this book was about. I was completely wrong. There's actually 4 things that I misunderstood about this book. The first thing that surprised me was that this book is not told from the perspective of Dr. Jekyll or Mr. Hyde, but rather Dr. Jekyll's lawyer, Mr. Utterson. The second thing I didn't know about this book is that it was originally written as a mystery novel with a big twist ending. And reading it in the modern day, I would say that the majority of people that are going to come to this book already know what the ending is going to be. For that reason, it's not going to hit the same way that it did in 1886. This book was the 19th century version of Fight Club, basically. You know, you get to the end and wait, they were the same guy the whole time? The third thing that surprised me about this book is that popular culture had led me to believe that this book was about a doctor who drank a potion or a concoction that he had created and turned into a beast, in my mind, not unlike the Incredible Hulk. I thought I was going to see a scene where he's tearing out of his clothes, but actually it's quite the opposite of that. He shrinks down into his clothes and becomes a bit of a pervert, a bit of a lunatic, a bit of a rapscallion. Essentially, he just becomes a complete creature of hedonism where he has no self-control and no regard for anyone else. He is the worst version of himself. And the last thing that really surprised me about this book is I didn't think it was going to be as good as it was, honestly. I think this is in my top 5 books for the year so far. It's really good. Now, that's not going to be true for everyone. If you're looking for something that is very scary and very unsettling, I don't really think this book is going to be for you. I've seen some reviews that think that this book is quite boring and the language is quite dense, especially at the very beginning of the book when the scene is being set. It relies on nebulous things like innate fears and atmosphere. If atmosphere doesn't matter to you, you might not like this book. But for me, I thought it was really great, and I'm going to use this video to try and explain why. The opening scene really does a great job at setting the tone for the entire novel that is to follow. Immediately, I felt drawn in to a cold, crisp, foggy Victorian London night as the 2 main characters, really the main character Utterson and his friend Lanyon, are walking down the street, and Lanyon recounts a story, something that he witnessed a few nights prior, where a crazed maniac trampled a young girl. Let me explain why I found this to be so good of an opening. It's not just that Mr. Hyde has trampled a young girl. That's not the horrific thing. That is horrific, but that's not the horrific thing. It's how indifferent he is to the situation. He's just kind of like being caught by the collar, and he's looking around going, all right, listen. What do you want? You want money? You want money? You know, he doesn't care about the girl. And like, if you just imagine the scene, you've got this wild-eyed man, you've got these kind of refined people, I guess you'd call them, and then you've got this young girl on the ground, injured, wondering why this has happened. And the contrast between these people on this side and then Mr. Hyde, who is like a fox amongst the pigeons. He's just this manic creature. Have you ever been at a really nice event, like, you know, just a day at the beach or a wedding, and then something crazy has happened, and everyone turns around and goes, oh no, not here, not. When it happens, when the tension breaks, everything feels surreal. And it's that kind of horror that this book relies on. Now, I spoke about how this book might suffer with a modern reader because a modern reader knows that Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde are the same person. It's become a kind of a cliche in the modern lexicon. You know, you can say about someone, he was like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, you know, completely opposite personalities, changed from one to the other. Everyone knows this story. It would be like getting to the end of Robin Hood and going, wait, he's stealing from the rich and giving to the poor? Like, wow, what a twist. But actually, in a way, the book is enhanced by that knowledge, because when Utterson is talking to Dr. Jekyll and he's talking about Mr. Hyde, every time that happened, there was a heightened sense of suspense added to that, because you know that Mr. Hyde is with us right now. The one thing that I felt was lacking, even though Mr. Hyde kind of pressures Utterson on a couple of occasions, you know, he kind of goes, oh, yeah, you've been talking about me to someone. Yeah, a mutual friend has told me that you've been going around town asking about me. I don't appreciate it, you know. By the way, I listened to some of the audiobook of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and every time Dr. Jekyll became Mr. Hyde, for some reason, he became a Cockney, which I find personally offensive, seeing as I myself, me and my family, we are a Cockney family. I dulled down the accent a little bit for these videos so that people can understand me. But yeah, in the mind of the narrator, evil automatically equated to Cockney, which is a bit messed up, but it's all right. We're used to it. It was kind of like, hello, sir. Yes, I'm Dr. Jekyll. Nice to meet you. And now I'm Mr. Hyde. What, you want to make a problem out of it? You know, it was just a bit, all right. Yeah, you've been talking about me. Yeah, would you want a bottle of water? Yeah. Even my wife, when I told her about it, she said, well, yeah, that's how you know he's evil. Because he has a Cockney accent. That's how you know he's evil. That's what she said to me. Big question, are Cockneys evil? Put that in the comments below. Does Cockney mean evil when you hear that voice? I mean, I always thought it meant working class hero, you know, but I'm obviously biased. I just kept expecting this, where Mr. Hyde is getting angrier and angrier, and Dr. Jekyll is kind of trying to warn him off, just saying, why don't you stop asking about my friend Mr. Hyde? You know, he's a little bit temperamental, as we know, you know, and I thought I was just going to keep seeing that rage increase and increase until the point where Mr. Hyde said, enough of this, Utterson's got to go. And then I thought they were going to have a big confrontation at the end where he tries to take him out of the equation. But that never came. And I just feel as though that's a little bit of a shame. I think one of the most interesting things about the book was the themes that it carried, which, as far as I interpreted, consisted of one, the duality of man. So you've got the side that we consider about ourselves to be the good side, the side that we aspire to be more like, to kind of lean into. And this is the side that we show everyone when we're at work, when we're around our friends and our family. This is ourselves that we're showing. It's not fake, it is our true selves, but this is the way that we would like to be seen. And then we've got the other self, who maybe is our lesser self. It's the kind of aspects of our personality that maybe we're a little bit ashamed of. Everyone has them, right? But the kind of stuff that we keep to ourselves, the hidden self. And sometimes it comes out maybe after we have a few drinks and we start getting a bit loud. And that's why after maybe a few drinks, most people have experienced this. You wake up the next day and you think, oh, why did I say that? Why did I do that? It's because you're letting out that other self, that kind of unadulterated version of you. That is your Mr. Hyde coming out. When you just completely lose all your inhibitions, when the mask comes off and you're just showing everyone, this is another part of me that you didn't know about. The Cockney side. In this book, what Dr. Jekyll is trying to do is separate those two selves so that they can become completely separate entities, so that he never has to feel bad. He can be purely good. But what he discovers is that these two sides of himself just want to gravitate back towards one another. They want to become a complete person. And that's something that eventually ends up happening more and more often. And while we're on the topic of drinking and, losing your inhibitions, I think that addiction is also a theme that's explored in this book. So what happens in this book? He drinks something and he becomes a louder, more free version of himself. And at first it's fun and he's enjoying himself, but then he starts to do things that he regrets. He starts to become this person that even he doesn't recognize until he's asking himself the question, wait a minute, is this the real me? Or am I the real me? Or are they the same person? And eventually it starts to feel like the only way that he can really, really have fun and actually, it's like ripping off the cellophane. He can actually feel and touch the world, the richness of flavors that the world has. He can only do that as Mr. Hyde when he drinks the potion. And he starts to become more reliant on it. But unfortunately, through constantly partaking in the potion that he's created, it starts to create problems in his life. And we know that it is an addiction just through the way that he talks about it. There's one scene in particular where he's talking to Mr. Utterson and he says, oh, I've completely cut Mr. Hyde out of my life now. Yeah, I'm done with Mr. Hyde. You won't be seeing him again. And then he can resist it for a little while until, he wants to enjoy himself. He just wants just a little, just take the edge off. Just a little bit. Eventually, it doesn't have the same effect that it used to. And he needs something else. I'll say this as well. The reveal at the end, even though I knew what was coming and we all knew what was coming, when they're kicking down the door and Mr. Utterson is saying, come to the door, come out. I know it's not you. I know it's not Dr. Jekyll in there. I know it's you. It's Hyde. Oh, man, I loved it. It was still satisfying, even though I knew what was behind the door. I will say this, though. If I didn't know, if I was a Victorian guy and I was reading this book for the first time with no foreknowledge of what was going to be behind the door, I think this would have been my favorite book of all time. It just would have blew my mind. So even though this book wasn't a perfect book by any means, it was a really good book. And it's got me excited to read more classic horror for the month of October. I've got 9 other classic horror books that I'm going to be reading this month. So yeah, really excited to get stuck into those. I'm going to talk about the next book that I'm going to be reading. But before I do that, let's get onto the ratings. Let's start with plot. I'm going to give the plot 3.5 stars out of 5. And that's because I don't think that the strength of this book is in the plot itself. It's quite a simple story, really. I think it's more in the building up of atmosphere, suspense, and the use of a very beautiful language. So yeah, I'm going to give the plot 3.5 stars out of 5. For the characters, I'm going to give them 3 stars out of 5. I thought Mr. Utterson was really good. I also really liked the butler of Dr. Jekyll. His name escapes me now, but I liked him a lot. Other than that, I felt like some of the characters were kind of samey, you know, a little bit indistinct. And so, yeah, 3 out of 5 stars. The setting, I'm going to give 5 stars out of 5. That's not just because I'm from London, and so I was familiar with a lot of the locations that were spoken about and a lot of the places that they went to in this book. It's actually the opposite. It made London feel very unfamiliar, kind of otherworldly, atmospheric, spooky. It made London feel scary, which, you know, is not my experience of London at all. But I enjoyed that a lot. So 5 stars out of 5. Originality, 5 stars out of 5. And I think, honestly, that's probably going to be the case with most of the classic horror that I read. You can only really judge originality on the time that these books were originally published. And I think that a lot of the classic horrors that I'm going to be reading this month, they are what all of horror is derivative of. This is the source material. So you have to say originality, 5 stars out of 5. And overall, I'm going to give The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde 4.5 stars out of 5. I've read better books this year, but not many. And so, like I said, this is going to be a top 5 book for me this year, but it's probably in a precarious situation. I think one good read could knock it off of the top 5 spots for the year. And maybe that will be another classic horror that I read. Maybe I'll read a few that are better than Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. But yeah, really, really enjoyed it. And speaking of the classic horror that I'm going to be reading this month, the next book that I'm going to read is The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. This is pretty short, honestly. So the review should be coming out, I would imagine, in the next couple of days. And if you'd like to see that review, maybe it's already out by the time you've watched this video, in which case you can click up here. Thanks so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. Happy reading.